Please be warned. Inspired by a true story deals with crimes that may contain adult themes and violence and is intended for a mature audience.
December 26, 1996. Patsy Ramsey wakes up at 5:30 a.m. to find her daughter missing and a ransom note on the stairs. Hours later, her daughter's body would be found inside the house. To this day, no murderer has ever been named. In 2016, Lifetime attempted to tell this story with very conflicting information. Always check every room, because Who Killed JonBenét was inspired by a true story. Welcome to True Crime for Cinephiles. This is Inspired by a True Story, a podcast devoted to keeping artists honest. And if you've never listened to our podcast before, first we detail the actual crimes. Then afterward, we discuss those facts as well as the film on its own and how much of it was true versus Hollywood magic. Now remember to share this podcast with your friends. Review us in the app you're listening to right now. We really do appreciate it. It helps the show immensely. I'm Aaron Peterson, an accredited film critic for the Hollywood Outsider podcast and website. And joining me today, our fellow film critics and true crime devotees, John Davenport.
Hey, buddy.
And Amanda Sink.
Hello, hello.
And this is one of the most renowned cases of all time. I actually thought we probably were not ever going to cover it, but because timing says why not, Netflix just released a 3-part documentary that's a cold case on the JonBenét Ramsey case, or JonBenét Ramsey, if you will. There's been millions of podcasts out there. I mean, we're hoping we have a different take on it than you have seen in other spaces, but, you know, I'm sure some of this you've heard before. But I will say, I hadn't looked into this in many, many years. There's a lot of stuff I didn't know.
One of the things that gets mentioned about this case is the 2016 documentary from CBS. That's my most recent experience with this, and it's interesting to see what has happened since then and the new documentaries that just came out on Netflix, the contrast between the two of them as far as where they take the storytelling that's happening there.
Is that's the one where they tried to pin it on Burke, right?
They tried to pin it on Burke for sure.
Even though the DA has publicly cleared him multiple times.
Yeah. Also, that investigation was ran by a former FBI agent, Jim Clemente, who was the guy who ran that investigation for CBS. And he's also a consultant for Criminal Minds, where he was the one doing the investigation on it. So it was interesting to see his whole take on that thing.
I know that they got sued to shit, and they had to settle with Burke.
I don't think Burke has to worry about anything ever again.
Sounds like he shouldn't have to begin with. I mean, it's really kind of tragic in that respect.
I'm not going to lie to you. When I started watching the documentary, I was questioning, like, did this kid just, like, snap and lose it? He's, like, 4 years older than her, so it's not like... There are kids who've done stuff like that.
Sure. No,
maybe not to that like detail. Like he probably wouldn't know how to do a garrote or however you say that. Maybe he would. I don't know. Do they teach that in the Cub Scouts or whatever it's called?
I think that's actually learned in the page 3 of the Cub Scouts handbook about, oh yeah, it's right here. How to make a garrote. No, it's not. It's not something.
I don't know. What if you need it to like help seal a wound or something?
It's not something that I'm aware of. I was in the Boy Scouts for a little while, and I don't recall that ever coming up. Ever.
Just checking.
I didn't even know what a garrote was until this case. I'll be perfectly honest. I had no idea even what it was.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I've known what a garrote is for a long time.
You don't get bonus points for that. I mean, good for you.
Yeah. I mean,
why do you know?
That actually means you're on the suspect list now. Good job.
I actually
dumbass.
Can't tell you.
Because apparently everyone's on the suspect list. No one's been cleared except for the Ramsey family, which is surprising that they're still getting constant disdain from the public, because now that this is back in the public eye, people have their theories that they've clung to for 30 years and they're just throwing them back out in the ether. Like I'm still seeing this stuff about Burke and John Ramsey and Patsy Ramsey. Like it's still all out there. And we figured, and by we, I mean Amanda forced us to, it was time to dig into this one.
Yeah, because Amanda somehow has never heard of the story.
She's younger, though. I mean, she's
I am
she's
younger.
much younger.
I was, to be perfectly transparent, I was like 3 years old when this happened.
So it could have happened to you.
So it could have happened to me. I was not a pageant winner, though. It could happen to any kid, to be honest with you. But I was intrigued by the way the media, I feel like the documentary on this case was partly about what happened and getting to the facts. And then the other part of it was how the media can skew public image so much and have such a detrimental impact. And how grimy this police department was. No offense, but that was some grimy stuff.
Two things. One, I think it's always important, especially as film critics, to mention, when you're talking about a documentary, every documentarian has a slant. Berlinger, who I believe is the director of this one, he very much has said publicly he wanted to showcase the Ramsey's innocence. That was his goal. So that's his slant, right? Everyone has a slant.
Right.
Not taking that away from anyone. That's a documentarian's right. He's making his film, you or his series, you do it your way. But keep that in mind that there are multiple documentaries about this subject, and several of them look at things a little differently. Going in with that mindset, you can see it that he's trying to show, hey, the Ramseys are perfectly clear. But there's also reasons why the police did suspect them at first. And there is good reason for some of that.
And I think there's fairness in that, but the delay in even releasing that the DNA didn't match.
Hang on. You're jumping the gun. We got to do the facts here.
I am. I'm so sorry. We have to give you all the
spoiler
details.
alert. What the hell?
Before we release the floor to you to start telling us this story, Aaron, one of the things that I want to point out is this happened close to the same time as OJ.
3 years after, yeah.
Yeah. Both cases become a referendum, essentially, on how police procedure should happen. Locking down crime scenes, how to handle evidence, all these evidentiary changes that we start seeing post JonBenét is mostly because of both what happened with OJ and what happened to JonBenét. Way too many questions, way too many things that can't be solved just because of how poorly everything was handled.
Grimy, I feel like is a strong word, Amanda, but I do see where you're coming from. I think it was shoddy police work at best because they didn't lock a crime scene down. But again, I want to come back to that. I want to get into the details, and we'll talk about it on the other side. So as of this recording, Who Killed JonBenét, the movie, the Lifetime movie, is streaming on Prime Video and Tubi, but this is always subject to change. If you want to watch the Netflix documentary we're talking about, you can find that on Netflix, Cold Case, JonBenét Ramsey. There are multiple documentaries about it. There's a very good 2020 one that kind of looks at the list, which I think is season 43, episode 10. There's lots of podcasts that have covered it. There's so much information on this case. There's actually a podcast called Who Killed JonBenét, so you can look that up too if you want a real deep dive. We're covering the overall details, the things that we have come to believe matter in the case, and less of the conjecture, because there's a lot of bad information out there, and we don't want to spend a lot of time on bad information. With that, okay, new episodes are released every 2 weeks of our show and can be found wherever you listen to podcasts or at thehollywoodoutsider.com. You can also hear episodes early if you support the show at patreon.com/thehollywoodoutsider. Feel free to suggest a film or share your thoughts on this episode by emailing us inspired@thehollywoodoutsider.com. That's inspired@thehollywoodoutsider.com. Film and true crime fans alike are always debating how true their true crime is. It's a case that captivated a nation, and half of what you heard was nonsense. This is the truth behind Who Killed JonBenét. JonBenét Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990, to John and Patsy Ramsey, and was named after her father. She also had an older brother, Burke, and half-siblings, Elizabeth Ramsey, who died in a car accident in 1992, John Andrew Ramsey, and Melinda Ramsey. Patsy Ramsey, just for fact, was a 1977 Miss West Virginia pageant winner and decided to introduce her daughter, little JonBenét, into the pageant mix as well. All those dreams melted on December 26, 1996. It's the morning after the Ramsey family had a lovely holiday dinner with friends. and Patsy Ramsey is up early to make coffee and get the day rolling. As she begins to kick off the day, she finds a note on the back stairs that lead to the kitchen.
Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money, and hence an earlier delivery, pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions, and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny, as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good Southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory. S.B.T.C.
Other than the fact that this was a 3-page ransom note, which is very unheard of, one intriguing fact about that amount, $118,000, is it is essentially the same figure as John Ramsey's Christmas bonus that year. How would the kidnapper know that? Well, let's just stew on that one. A note and a child missing from their bed. Patsy and John decide to ignore the note demands and calls 911 at 5:52 a.m. A police officer, Rick French, arrives almost immediately and conducts a basic search of the house. There is a window in the basement, cracked open. It was also broken the previous summer, and John claimed to have forgotten to fix it, with a suitcase under that window that John and family would later claim should not have been there. There was a door near the same window, but Officer French failed to check this room. Shortly later, Detective Linda Arndt arrives. Interviews are conducted, evidence is collected. John and Patsy comfort each other and their son Burke, and still nothing. John states he notifies Linda Arndt that the basement window is open and a suitcase is under it that shouldn't be there. The note stated a call would be coming tomorrow between 8 and 10 a.m. It never arrives on December 26. John later states he was unsure if tomorrow meant that day or the next day. A kidnapping with no further demands, things begin heating up. As they stay behind, waiting, Detective Arndt orders John Ramsey and his best friend, Fleet White, to search the house and look for anything unusual. Anything out of order. No officer accompanies either man. Sometime around 1 p.m., after Fleet White apparently opened the door to the same room and said he saw nothing, John Ramsey returns to the room Officer French missed, and he opens the door. Immediately inside lies the body of 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey. An autopsy would later show her skull had been cracked. Her hands had been tied behind her back, and she had been sexually assaulted, including bruising in the vaginal area, by what is later determined to be a piece of the same paintbrush that was used as a garrote, which was attached to a cord to strangle her with. Strangulation was her official cause of death in the autopsy. A deep ligature mark on her neck and right wrist that would later indicate a stun gun was used, and her mouth had been covered with duct tape. The cord, duct tape, and allegedly another piece of rope in another room were not found in any other part of the house, meaning it seemed those items were brought there, or at least were not from there, typically. The room JonBenét was found in was in the basement, near that broken window with a suitcase that was placed directly below the window, that John would later state should not have been there. Now, for clarification, the window was already broken, as I stated earlier, and it led to a grate that opened into the backyard. Some police indicated there were spider webs to indicate the grate had not been moved and you couldn't go out that way, not without disturbing the spider webs. But a later detective, Lou Smith, I'll come back to him in a minute, stated it was not as definitive as you think. Spiders spin webs very fast. And the pictures that were used to illustrate this, no one could determine how long after they were taken. John Ramsey stated the window was broken a while back and he had not gotten around to fixing it, and when he searched the basement he noticed and did notify Linda Arndt of it. I'm just reiterating this because it seems to be a distortion of facts in the media. DNA testing was done at this time and in later years, and a male's DNA profile is found in JonBenét's underwear, under her fingernails, and as well as 2 other profiles via touch DNA on her pajamas. But authorities, to this day, have never found a match, and that included a test against John and Burke Ramsey. What's funny and horrible is that in 1997, when the first DNA test was completed in early January, the police did not tell the Ramseys of this result, that there was a male profile and they were cleared. They were the focus. The Ramseys were the suspects. It's important to remember that the ransom note was verified to have been written on a pad from within the Ramsey home, written with a pen from within the Ramsey home. There was evidence that another note had been started and discarded as well. When handwriting analysis was completed, John Ramsey was ruled out. Patsy Ramsey was inconclusive, meaning nothing definitive could be determined either way. Rather than wait to share most of this information in an appropriate timeline, I thought it was crucial to explain while you were hearing about the body being found. From here on out, rather than a straight timeline, which is stacked with red herrings left and right, we're going to focus on the items that police have determined are true and matter. John Ramsey, at the time of finding his daughter, reacted quickly, and by doing so, mostly destroyed the crime scene. He ripped the duct tape off of her mouth, picked her body up, and carried her upstairs. Detective Linda Arndt immediately understands what this means for all of her evidence. She later would give an interview to imply John Ramsey was the killer because of how he looked after he found out his daughter was dead, though she never clearly stated it. And personally, as a father of 2 children, I can completely understand John Ramsey in that moment, though I probably would not react the same. It's also important to note, Linda Arndt was in charge of this crime scene, and she did very little to seal it off. Detective Steve Thomas, who would be involved later, felt differently. He came to believe, devotedly, that Patsy Ramsey killed her daughter due to a rage over a bedwetting incident, even accusing her of it on June 1st, 1997. To her face, he stated clearly, "Patsy, I look you right in the eye, and I think you're good for this." And though there was urine found at the scene of the crime, which is not atypical for a dead body, there was not fresh urine in the bed to confirm this as a theory. Other internet detectives would claim JonBenét's brother Burke killed JonBenét because she stole some of his pineapple, which was found in her stomach despite the parents stating that she didn't eat any the day before, and a bowl of pineapple was found on the counter. So he hit her with a flashlight out of anger, and they claimed that the parents covered it up to save him. There's no forensic evidence whatsoever to support either of these theories. Steve Thomas later wrote a book with his Patsy theory, and the Ramseys sued him into hell for it. It was settled, and then later CBS implied it was Burke, and there was later information that Burke stated to Dr. Phil he did go back downstairs to play with a toy, and that they used this to imply that a 9-year-old killed his sister. And Burke does the same thing, sues and settles. John Ramsey stated he helped Burke with a toy before bed, but it didn't matter by that point. The internet decided that Burke was now guilty, despite being cleared by the police and the district attorney multiple times, publicly. Everyone, including you, listening, has a theory on this case. And that's fine. Just remember, it's not a fact. It is important to note that the family, in actual fact, all 3 of them in this house, have now been established as victims by the Boulder District Attorney at this time. There is enough information now to publicly clear them. They are no longer suspects. Steve Thomas later retired from the police department, where he wrote his book that he was sued over, and left a very public resignation letter that caused more issues. It's very long, but there is a section here that I find intriguing.
The district attorney's office should be the ethical and judicial compass for the community, ensuring that justice is served, or at least sought. Instead, our DA has become a spinning compass for the media. The perpetuating interference continues that justice is somehow just around the corner. I do not see that occurring as the 2-year anniversary of this murder approaches. It is my belief that district attorney's office has effectively crippled this case. The time for intervention is now. It is difficult to imagine a more compelling situation for the appointment of an entirely independent prosecution team to be introduced into this matter, who would oversee an attempt at righting this case. Unmistakably, and worst of all, we have failed a little girl named JonBenét. 6 years old. Many good people, decent, innocent citizens, are forever bound by the murder of this child. There is a tremendous obligation to them, but an infinitely greater obligation to her, as she rests in a small cemetery far away from the anomaly of a place called Boulder. A distant second stands the second tragedy, the failure of the system in Boulder. Ask the mistreated prosecution witnesses in this investigation who cooperated for months, who now refuse to talk until a special prosecutor is established. Ask former detectives who have quietly tendered their shields in disheartenment. Ask all those innocent people personally affected by this case, who have had their lives upset because of the arbitrary label of suspect being attached. Ask the cops who cannot speak out because they still wear a badge. The list is long. I know that to speak out brings its own issues, but as you also know, there are others who are disheartened as I am, who are biting their tongues, searching their consciences. I know what may occur. I may be portrayed as frustrated, disgruntled. Not so. I have an exemplary and decorated 13-year career as a police officer and detective. I didn't want to challenge the system. In no way do I wish to harm this cause or subvert the long and arduous work that has been done. I only wish to speak up and ask for assistance in making a change. I want justice for a child who was killed in her home on Christmas night. This case has defined many aspects of all our lives and will continue to do so for all of our days. My colleagues put their hearts and souls into this case, and I will take some satisfaction that it was the detective team who showed tremendous efforts and loyalties to seeking justice for this victim. Many sacrifices were made. Families, marriages. In the latter months of the investigation, I was diagnosed with a disease which will require a lifetime of medication. Although my health declined, I was resolved to see the case through to its satisfactory closure. I did that on June 1st through 2nd. And on June 22nd, I requested a leave of absence without mention of what transpired in our department since Christmas 1996. What I witnessed for 2 years of my life was so fundamentally flawed, it reduced me to tears. Everything the badge ever meant to me was so foundationally shaken. One should never have to sell one's soul as a prerequisite to wear it. On June 26th, After leaving the investigation for the last time and leaving the city of Boulder, I wept as I drove home, removing my detective shield and placing it on the seat beside me, later putting it in a desk drawer at home, knowing I could never put it back on. There is some consolation that a greater justice awaits the person who committed these acts, independent of the system we call justice. A greater justice awaits. Of that, at least, we can be confident.
And that was the short version. Steve Thomas had thoughts. To give some credence to the police at the time, after the initial reporting and finding of the body, John Ramsey and his family lawyered up at the advice of others. Meaning that outside of that first day when they were interviewed, the family refused to speak to the police at their lawyers' requests, though they did cooperate with any aspect of the investigation they were asked to. Outside of that. They did, however, go on CNN on January 1st, 1997, just days after the murder, to address the circulating rumors because their friends implied the media was implying that they were killers. John Ramsey later admitted that this was a mistake. But not about the media implying it. They were. I was there. Now, this is the part that boggles my mind. But I also have a firm belief that you don't talk to police without lawyer representation. Everyone has rights, even in the harshest of situations. We can all judge this however we want to. But if you have listened to true crime as often as I expect you have, this makes total sense. Rather than go through a multitude of back and forths, let's just look at the big picture. Lou Smit was an accomplished or legendary detective who closed around 200 murder cases, including closing the murder of Kelsey Grammer's sister in 1975. And Boulder authorities brought him in to assist several months after the murder when nothing had moved forward. They valued his opinion, until he felt the family was in the clear. It's important to remember that neither Linda Arndt nor Steve Thomas had handled homicides previously. And almost immediately, Smit established that it was no one that lived in the house. And Boulder police did not take kindly to that idea. See, Lou Smit's theory was clearly this. At some point before the murder, an assailant, an intruder, broke into the house, likely through the window in the basement. Smit recorded himself easily entering the house this way as well as exiting. Something Boulder police claimed wouldn't happen. Smit said, and I quote, "There is substantial credible evidence of an intruder and a lack of evidence that the parents are involved." Furthermore, Smit believed that this intruder, possibly two of them, was in the home for a long period before the murder. Now he believed that the assailant was attracted there after seeing JonBenét in a pageant likely, and then broke into this house and familiarized himself with the floor plan. Or it was of a personal nature. Then he waited for the family to return. Smit's theory was this man, or men, were in the house for hours. Once the Ramseys returned, Smit theorized that the intruder had likely already written that ransom note and intended to either distract the parents with it or take JonBenét until things went sideways. Smit worked on this case, attempting to find the killer and clear the family until the day he died in 2010. And he asked his family to continue after his death, which they have. It's a very noble man. Other facts that don't get reported too often. Around 9 months later, there was another attack on a young girl who knew JonBenét that police stated is not connected. Now just hear the situation out. The young girl, known only as Amy, was attacked in the middle of the night in her bed. The mother heard a commotion and went to the daughter's bedroom to see the still unknown assailant attempting to assault this girl. And the mother sprayed the intruder with pepper spray, which forced the intruder out. Thankfully, the little girl was saved. What was later discovered was that the perpetrator had already been in the house the whole time, because they set the alarm after they came home, and it never went off, and the theory by police was that the attacker lied in wait. The police claim these cases are not connected due to the fact that Amy was not murdered. Okay, Boulder. And a couple of additional aspects to the evidence we've already discussed. First, that suitcase, the one found directly under that broken window. that the Ramseys said absolutely was not in that location before? Well, inside it was a Dr. Seuss book. And curiously, fibers from inside this suitcase were found on the shirt JonBenét was wearing when she was found that very morning. Inside that suitcase. Was someone attempting to smuggle her out of the house in the suitcase? There were scuff marks on the wall below that window. Second, on the top of the suitcase there was a tiny piece of glass, seemingly from that open window. Now, many internet detectives have theorized that Fleet White said he moved that glass, but I could find no actual confirmation of that. As of today, it has never been explained how this piece of glass, nor this suitcase, nor those fibers ever got there. Also, next to where JonBenét was found was a partial footprint from high-tech shoes, which no one in the house was verified to own. Most importantly, the police allowed friends of the Ramseys to come by to comfort the family. The crime scene was never locked down. While so many point to John Ramsey and his actions after finding the body of his 6-year-old daughter, I just want to reiterate that no one locked that crime scene down properly to begin with. John Ramsey did not search the house until the afternoon. So let us all remember who's responsible for protecting the evidence. No one should have been wandering that house on that morning. It is worth reminding that the police seemingly also used the media to attempt to pressure the Ramseys into admitting to a crime they claimed to have nothing to do with. For years, the police focused solely on John and Patsy. And yes, the parents did showcase their daughter in pageants. And yes, many of those pictures make me uncomfortable as well as many of you. They also resemble many pictures of young girls in pageants. That's a world where Patsy came from. Though, like many of you, I will never understand it. It's just ick. FBI profiler John Douglas believed the note was written before the murder, and originally this was a kidnapping gone wrong in some way. There was a grand jury that spent a year sifting through details, and after which the DA elected not to press any charges. And later it came out this grand jury had, in fact, elected to charge the Ramseys. Kind of. Many interpreted this to mean that they thought they were absolutely guilty. But if you look into it, what the grand jury actually recommended was filing charges for putting JonBenét in a situation that led to her death, meaning the pageantry, and possibly covering up, and they couldn't determine which parent had done what. There wasn't any evidence. The DA knew they couldn't prosecute. Also, it's important to note that a grand jury is not a trial. They only see what the prosecution presents, clearly demonstrating there was not enough evidence. The defense offers nothing. They're not allowed to, unless the prosecution invites them, which, why would they? They want to go to court. Fleet White was a friend to John and Patsy, but after spending time with the police, he came back essentially at war with John Ramsey. Fleet even allegedly called 911 from John's house a few days prior that still to this day remains unexplained. It seemed Fleet White was revolting against any implications with the situation, and their friendship quickly fell apart. Fleet White and his wife Priscilla even took it upon themselves to write an editorial taking aim at the investigation. Fleet White is also not seen as a suspect in the investigation at this time. This just seems like a person doing everything possible to get his own family out of the scope of the investigation. The Boulder District Attorney officially cleared the Ramseys with an official apology letter in 2008, long after Patsy had died of cancer in 2006. The murder of JonBenét Ramsey remains unsolved as of the recording of this podcast, and no official suspects remain currently. There have been several suspects that were high profile, such as Michael Helgoth and Gary Oliva, but they were both cleared by DNA. John Mark Carr, who had moved to Thailand, had confessed to killing JonBenét. He was later arrested before being cleared on DNA and his own family providing a very solid alibi. There are not many cases in true crime that are more polarizing than that of JonBenét Ramsey. At the time, JonBenét was America's daughter, and everyone just wanted this monster caught. The world became this little girl's family, and in response, the world tore the actual family apart through conjecture, distorted facts, and wild theories that covered accusing seemingly anyone who'd ever encountered JonBenét. For years, everyone knew that John and Patsy Ramsey murdered their precious little girl. Then, everyone knew her little 9-year-old brother somehow was involved. Evidence has cleared all three of them, yet the theories persist. People still know. Books have been written, television have made countless documentaries on the crime, and still no one has been held accountable, despite everyone knowing. The facts are this. JonBenét Ramsey was kidnapped in the night, sexually assaulted, viciously attacked, and strangled in the middle of the night in the safest space she knew, her home. Did an intruder come in through that basement window, memorize the layout, write out a ransom note, and then murder this little girl? Or was it someone there for a measure of retribution against John or Patsy? As of now, we still don't know. And if this case has taught us anything, it's that sometimes admitting you don't know is the smartest decision to make. Thank you, Amanda, for your ransom note reading.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
I do think it's important to note, I didn't put it in the facts because I don't know if it pertains to the case, but Lou Smith did mention it himself, so I think it's of note, is that the movie Ransom came out 2 months before this happened with Mel Gibson, where they get a very detailed ransom note as well that sounded quite similar in some respects.
Oh, wow.
So, kids, we've watched a lot of documentaries, movies, over this case over the course of my life, Amanda's last week, as she learned this is new. What do you guys think of this now that you have all this information? Do you have any existing theories? Do you believe it was the intruder? Do you believe there's something else more personal? Like what?
Going into watching the movie and watching the new documentary, I was still very much on the side of there had to have been something that happened in that house. I used to find it hard to believe that somebody got into the house, lived there for hours, waiting for these people to show up, waiting for them to then go to bed, and then to do something in the middle of the night like this. Like I thought all that was like really hard to believe.
Why?
But, huh?
Why?
I know when somebody is in my place.
You don't. Not if they're good.
Also, this was over 6,000 square feet.
I was going to get to that.
That is a mansion.
Okay, get to your mansion talk then.
So I never really realized the scope of the size of this house and exactly how it was built. And they did a really good job of describing the fact that this house was not just a house that was built by a plan. It was several houses that were planned throughout the years and built onto in a way that made it confusing and hard to really get to. Then it suddenly made sense that somebody can actually be hiding someplace in this house and for everyone to not know about it.
I feel like it's incredibly likely that this was not necessarily a stranger, someone who obviously knew where JonBenét lived and where her family was. And so a family member, a friend, something. I can sort of see the potential for Patsy and motive there, but in the same respect, the sexual component to it is where I struggle with it, because there's just no evidence or indication that was something that she had done. There was no prior abuse of this child, as evidenced by their pediatrician. So that's where I struggle with the Patsy theory. I don't feel like John was responsible. I don't feel like anymore Burke is responsible. Obviously, the confessed killers that they were able to rule out through DNA, which is not 100% reliable, but it's reliable enough that they use it in court. So to me, that has to mean a lot more than, oh, okay, it doesn't match. It could still be them. So I think that there's still someone out there that perpetrated this. Now, do I think Patsy could have orchestrated some of this? I guess potentially. But I see more like of the theory of Patsy murdering her more out of like emotion rather than like jealousy for the fame she didn't get to have continued on.
But here's the thing is, if the Boulder district attorney finally cleared them, shouldn't we not even think of that as a possibility anymore? Or should we? It's still.
I don't trust them because of the way they handled it from the beginning. There's not public confidence or trust in that department after what they've done to this case. And I feel like they probably on some level recognize that. Like, people are not going to trust them. Now, the other part of this whole entire thing is how poorly they managed it from the beginning. And so how much evidence could we have had if it would have been properly managed?
Oh, absolutely. I think you probably have more clear DNA. Currently, there is male DNA that was found in her underwear. That was very clear that they did catch. And then years later, they got touch DNA, which didn't come into effect until later. So when they retested, I think it was in 2008 or whenever it was, they found touch DNA on the pajamas. So they couldn't rule it as different from the original DNA was found. So that means that it is possible that it's the same DNA, same male's DNA. They did not preserve the crime scene in any way, shape, or form. And I do think that too much of this case was relied upon how people acted. And that just bugs me. I just get tired of hearing that case after case after case when, people, especially authorities, love to say, well, they didn't act like you would expect someone to act. Well, I will say this, like, number one, John Ramsey had already lost a daughter, and he also was high up in his particular vocation, right? So he's a well-principled man in the business world. I've worked in the business world, and I've raised children. And if you do those things, you can compartmentalize. I think even traumatic events you can compartmentalize. I don't think anyone would see me cry if one of my children were found. I would be in too much of a compartmentalization mode in terms of I need to do everything I can to find the killer. That's what I would have to do and deal with it. Like, in my mind goes to items, like a checklist that I have to do. And I don't think that makes you less emotional. That's just how you choose to deal with trauma or grief. Mm-hmm. And we always hear this in cases, well, they didn't handle it how I would think they did. They weren't sitting there bawling or losing their mind. Not everybody reacts that way, man. And it's like, in what decade are we finally going to learn that people do react differently? I'm not saying that there aren't people that just act guilty. That happens. But there's also a lot of people that just, they handle it differently than you do or how you expect. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily guilty of anything. It just bugs me when we always jump to that conclusion. It's a thing that still happens. If you look at Linda Arndt and Steve Thomas, they both had very specific opinions of what happened. She implied, thankfully she didn't say it, so she didn't get sued, but she implied that she thought John Ramsey was guilty because of the way he looked at her after he found JonBenét's body. If you go and look into that, it's mind-boggling that someone would come to that conclusion at that moment, because in that moment, I'd be looking at everyone in the room like I wanted to beat him senseless, I would think. That's a moment you can't really control your emotion. You're just too messed up in the head. And then Steve Thomas was stuck on his theory. And if you go look at his testimony, there is moments where I don't even know if he believes what he's even saying. Like, it just makes no sense how he just makes these leaps.
Seriously. Also, real quick, both of those contribute to my theory that this was a police officer that did it.
Oh, Amanda's throwing down some shade, huh?
Ooh.
Well, we've got the stun gun that was used, and you have all of this like secrecy and protection and weird targeting from the police department as though they're trying to protect somebody, or there was misinformation intentionally spread around. Like, there's just too much. Like, if you watch Thomas's interviews or listen to it, it's so weird how stupid he sounds, and he knows he sounds stupid, but he's saying it anyway.
So you do not believe he's a hero cop like he's portrayed in the film?
No.
But this is your theory too, by the way. You're not indicating that you think it's him or anything, but you're
not specifically him. I just think that there was
had some law enforcement training of some respect.
There was some involvement from a police officer in some capacity for whatever reason. I don't know the motive.
What do you think about that, John? You think Amanda just cracked the case?
Well, the whole police officer thing would actually make so much sense considering the amount of time this person lived in the house and the way they were able to get away with it. Not that I think that police officers are brilliant criminals at all. It's certainly a good way to muddy the waters.
Interesting, Amanda. Maybe you just cracked this baby open wide.
I'm sure this has been thought of like 12,000 times and investigated, and there's some sort of
I don't know. Let's check
piece
Reddit.
of information that, yeah.
That's where the detectives live. We've been there too. We're not knocking anyone that's on Reddit. I promise you. Get it. Once you fall down a rabbit hole, you start looking everywhere.
And you got all those detectives that were leaving the case because of how it was being handled and what was going on. So there's just like some, whether it was someone who did it that was law enforcement or they had ties to law enforcement, I just feel like there's something incredibly suspicious.
Fair point. Now, I want to kind of go down a couple pieces of this. I mean, there's so much information, and a lot of it comes from a bungled investigation. They should have locked it down. The parents shouldn't have been allowed to go into any room once this occurred, let alone opening doors and picking bodies up and removing duct tape from a child's
hey guys, can you go do the investigation on our behalf, even though you're possible suspects?
But I will say, in John Ramsey's defense, if I found my 6-year-old daughter laying on the floor, I would have done the exact same thing. I don't think your brain works at that level. No matter how much you can compartmentalize, that's a moment of shock. And that's where just reaction takes over. Nothing about that do I find, other than, yes, he ruined the case. Yes, he ruined the crime scene. That, to me, is also on her because she allowed him to search the area. That's on the police officer who was supposed to be in charge of the scene. You told him to go do that. Yeah,
100%. That's your fault.
I can't imagine what it would be like to be the police detective that sends these people into the house going, why don't you get out of my hair, go keep yourself busy and look around the house to see if you find anything. And then all of a sudden they find the body. After these police officers were checking everywhere, quote unquote, after everything they were doing, the body is found hours later in the search. Can't imagine what it would feel like to be the lead of this investigation and that happen.
Let's talk about a couple of the things. So the Ramseys are, they call the police, right? They get this crazy ransom note. It's 3 pages. I think that's insane. To me, that none of that actually sounds like a real ransom note in any way, shape, or form. Now, I get why you could see how the parents were trying to cover something up and they went a little overboard because they found the pad in the house. To me, it does come across as an intruder who's been in the house with plenty of time on their hands to write out a 3-page ransom note. Because they're walking around the house, they're surmising everything. They found some pay stubs or something along those lines. I could see all of those factors that lead to creating that very long, elaborate note. Now, at the same time, once they call the police and everything goes through and they're answering questions throughout the day. And then by the end of the day, after that, they lawyer up. They have attorneys. Now, these are people, they're not rich, but they're well-to-do-ish, right? They definitely have more money than most people. I would think that would be the first thing that they would advise, that lawyers would advise, is for you to
100%
to not say anything, right? It's pretty
especially
common.
Because he technically found the body and quote unquote, unintentionally contaminated the crime scene.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was by their direction, that's still not a good look for him.
Oh, he didn't technically found the body. He actually found the body.
Yeah,
he did. Yeah, he did. So I get the lawyering up. Going on CNN, that's a wild thing that they have. Honestly, they kind of fed that themselves a little bit. But I kind of also I get to a degree them wanting to go on the offensive because the implication.
It was a national thing too.
It was.
It's not like this was just a local story at that point. It was huge enough that it was probably, I think they just had poor advisement. Like, okay, you can go in and nationally address all of it publicly. The where they messed up is that there was still not a statement given to the police.
Official statement.
Official statement, a formal interview.
The long 6-hour thing where they're
hers was 6.5, his was 2.
Right.
And that didn't happen until April,
which is
the following year.
Months later.
Yes. A lot of time has passed at that point. Now they did cooperate like immediately after by giving DNA samples and handwriting samples and all that stuff. So it's not like they were hiding anything. That's why I feel like it's just bad advisement.
I think based on what I've read is that the lawyers didn't advise them. They just went and did that interview because friends were implying that people are looking at you for this. People are implying, like the police are basically positing it as you killed your daughter. So if you don't get ahead of it, that's how the court of public opinion is going to be framed. I could see that to some degree. I still think what they did was dumb. I don't think there's anything smart about that choice.
Definitely stupid.
Yeah, but at least I understand why they elected to do it.
You know, the thing I can't help but think about when it comes to this case is how much not just the Ramseys muddied the waters by their actions, but how much the police did and the news did by accepting some of the leaked information from the police. There was just a lot of that going around where everyone's trying to manipulate the court of public opinion in one way or shape or another. And so little work at least optically, so little work was done in the actual investigation. It was more so like, oh, we're going to use our reporters and you're going to use your reporters and we're going to have these duke outs out in front of everybody. And
I think it's very known at this point that police were using media to try to force the Ramseys into, either confessing or sitting down with them for whatever they wanted to do. And I do think, look, I'll be honest with you, I think police do this all the time. I think they use their power and wield it as a baton. And I don't think that that's necessarily fair because you are innocent until proven guilty, unless you happen to have absolute proof of some sort, eyewitnesses' DNA that nails you to a cross, so to speak. You are innocent until proven guilty. And it very much felt like the police had determined they were guilty without actually being able to prove it. And they were just trying to figure out which one of them they could break first.
It felt like a lot of confirmation bias.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Like, this fits our theory. Cool. We're checking the box. We need to clear this high-profile case as soon as possible.
And they were in over their heads, way over their heads. They don't do homicides very often. They obviously were not seasoned homicide detectives. They were all on board with Lou Smith's involvement until he immediately went against what they had determined was the outcome. Steve Thomas was not thrilled with Lou Smith taking the stance that the family was innocent, and he just wouldn't have any part of it. He was very stuck on his theory. And I do think people get in confirmation bias, and they also get in theory bias where they've already cemented all their energy to this one theory. It has to be the situation. It can't be anything else. And years later, it's been proven Steve Thomas was wrong. Linda Arndt was wrong. Like, they've been cleared, finally, years and years later. But you don't hear those people coming out and apologizing for all the hell they brought just because people didn't react the way they wanted them to. Mm-hmm. And I just, So they found DNA, male DNA in the underwear. I think all involved seem to indicate that once they find that person, that's the killer. I think everybody kind of agrees on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only thing that's outstanding.
As long as they're able to identify the person and then figure out where they were at the time to make sure that it's not like some sort of accident, some sort of cross-contamination or any of those other things that could have happened because of the way this crime scene was handled, then yeah, that's our person.
What about the other attack? 9 months later, someone that knows JonBenét, and they are attacked. The girl's name, thankfully, is still, I couldn't find it anywhere, and I'm glad. Probably she deserves to remain silent on her name. But
what if it was a security guard that oversaw a bunch of these pageants, stood in the back?
Like, she's really on this law enforcement of one type or another. Look at you
throwing some darts everywhere you can.
Yeah, she's like, what
Stun
if it was
gun?
No, I get it. I get it.
They never called the FBI in on it. Maybe he was an FBI agent.
No, that's crazy.
Security?
Oh, that's where we draw the line?
No, that's an interesting take. Security for the pageant. Security.
They had to be
home security officer, something like that. Maybe,
some creep who was able to see little girls. And there were reports of or a couple men that would be at the pageants that didn't have kids in the show.
Yeah.
And didn't know anybody.
Those should be your first suspects, honestly.
It very well could be connected. Could also not be connected.
Nobody's addressing what the second attack. Do you think that sounds very similar? Does it not?
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. Especially when you go, if it wasn't for the fact that the mother walked in on the whole thing and then made as much noise as possible, it just to save her kid's life, that all sounds the same.
Just saying, it's worth looking into. Boulder PD.
Like, I don't understand why they don't have any sort of evidence on that person. Why it's just like, oh, well, there was a guy here and then he ran off. Why? Well, there must have been something like
there's
fingerprints.
Ensuing struggle. You'd think there'd be some DNA at the scene. At some point. But that person was never caught either. So, interesting. In terms of the actual evidence, because it's all tainted, not much of it is known, except for, just the way that their little girl died was horrific. Absolutely horrific. A garrote is basically a device used to hold thread. That is what was used to strangle her. There was a skull fracture inflicted upon her that was, I believe, 8 inches along the way. Like, that's an extremely powerful hit, but that's not what actually killed her according to the autopsy. It was a strangulation, which means she was likely alive when she died of all of these things. It's a horrible, tragic situation, and I firmly believe that there was an intruder at the time. I don't see why that would be unfeasible to imagine that someone could break into a house and wait. That seems like what a crazy sociopath would do, honestly. Patience.
I had a hard time believing that part until I saw Lou do the whole move in and out of that window.
Yeah, that was kind of funny, right? Because I've seen this in multiple documentaries where officers have actually talked about it, where they didn't think that it was possible to actually go in through this window, through this grate. Essentially, it's a grate outside of the house, like a drain grate, I guess you would call it.
Mm-hmm.
Keeps leaves out of the windowsill. You open the grate, you go down, and there's a window, and it was open. That's the window that was open, and there was a suitcase right under it. And so the police...
With debris and a partial almost footprint.
Yes, with a partial
Mind
footprint.
you.
Yeah. Other police and whatnot said that that was not feasible. Somebody couldn't do that. So Lou Smith literally just films himself doing it. He's in the house in like 5 seconds. It's insane how quickly he gets into the house through that.
And he was like 60-something, and he did it multiple times.
Not to mention, it's one of the things that John mentions. Oh, yeah, that's how I got into the house once because I forgot my key.
Yeah, that's how he broke the window, right? So he knew that was there. Now, should he have fixed it? All those things? Sure. I don't know, man. That seems the most likely scenario to me. It just does. Sometimes, like they often say, sometimes the things it's just what it appears to be.
The most common logical reasoning is typically the right one.
Well, that's the problem here, though.
That is a conflict because that's usually the family.
What you're talking about is Occam's razor, and that's where the problem comes in here, because Occam's razor will tell you that it's probably the family. You can always point things back to the family, no matter if they were cleared by the DA's office or not. You can figure out a way to point things right back to the family. Is it as likely that somebody is stuck in the house, hung out for a day, ate popcorn? Oh, they're home now. Okay, I'm going to wait till they go to sleep. Let me do something.
It was like a handful of hours.
Yeah, it's not like 5 days, man.
Dramatic effect. Okay.
Okay.
Dramatic effect.
All right.
Is it as likely that somebody hung out for 5 hours? Let's use the real numbers. It could have been 5 hours. It could have been less. Then hid when the family got there and nobody noticed that there was something up with the house.
Yes. That's a big house. 6,000 square feet is a big house.
It's a big house. I never really, no matter how many things that I've seen of this story, it never hit me just how big that house was until like this most recent documentary. That's when I finally went, oh, that's a house.
And on the, I want to say it was I watched so much stuff on this. I think it was the 2020 interview, the 2020 documentary that covered it back in season 43, episode 10 of their episode runs. I believe it was that one where they said there was an indication that someone ran across the Ramseys' lawn the day of the murder, the night of the murder, that someone saw someone run across their lawn. Now, they didn't run to their back of their house or anything, but they saw someone run across their lawn the day of the murder, Christmas Day. So, I hadn't heard that before, so I'm mentioning it. I don't know how factual that is, but it's not 2020. Got to be true, right? Everything's got to be true that you hear. It's just sad. This poor little girl still doesn't have justice, and so many weird things exist. His buddy Fleet completely going against him and basically, trying to do everything he can to clear himself just because he's mentioned in tandem with this event. You know, I mean, people lost friends, family, livelihoods. I mean, I believe the Ramseys have gone just broke. You have Patsy Ramsey, who died of cancer before she could even find out who killed her daughter, while other people famously just thought she was the murderer. It's just, all of it is sad. All of it is sad. There's nothing happy here. Do you think they'll ever find the killer?
As I understand it, they're trying to get the DNA tested through that genealogy trick.
Mm-hmm.
It's
That's
possible.
how they caught the Golden State Killer.
That I think will absolutely change things for sure.
All right, so we got to talk about this. We haven't talked about this movie yet. So
Oh, right. There was a movie about this.
yeah, there was a movie, it's a Lifetime movie, and again, you know, you can find it streaming on Prime. But the original Lifetime movie revisits the infamous murder of JonBenét Ramsey and the details that captivated the nation. It was written by Brian Ross, directed by Jason Lapeyre, and starred Eion Bailey, Julie Campbell, and Michael Gill. So as a movie, what did you think?
I wasn't mad at it.
I think honestly, for a Lifetime movie, they did a decent job of putting the evidence out there. I mean, some of it is not accurate. And it seems like they were still not wanting to admit that the Ramseys had been cleared. And this was in 2016, which they certainly had been by then. I didn't like that part of the story. And I really, really did not like having JonBenét narrate the movie. I thought that was messed up.
Mm-hmm.
That was very abusive on the viewer.
It was very manipulative.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for, manipulative. One of the things I didn't like was the way Lou Smith was depicted in this. He comes in after 72 hours. He makes his statement as to what he thinks happened, and they all act, and they drop it like a bad habit too. Afterwards, they all act like he's a crazy old man, that he's absolutely wrong. That may have been exactly what happened, but I would have liked to have seen some more care handled in his direction, especially after finding out more about what he did with the case.
I don't think the movie did much for anything except what Steve Thomas thought. Like, I really feel like the movie was devoted to his personal plight. And I don't understand that when the guy wrote a book and he was sued into oblivion for writing it. And he settled. So, you know, that doesn't mean anything, but I also think, to me, that's you're trying to profit. You could say you're trying to get the word out there, but you already did that. You wrote this long, you think you're more important than the case in this respect. And I just don't understand why they didn't really present much more of Lou Smith's side of things. If you're going to take this Steve Thomas stance, like just to show the opposing view a little bit more in detail. I think they do show it.
Right.
And they do say, like, Steve, you're kind of being blinded here. That is an indication at one point by Lou Smith. But they also kind of imply that, well, you're just an old dog and you haven't learned any new tricks, kind of thing. It was Patsy.
You got lucky once and all of a sudden it's the same story for everything. Was kind of the story that he said it.
Yeah, pretty much. And I'm just saying, like, one was an experienced homicide cop who had 150, 200 murder cases closed, and the other one had never done one. So I'm going to lean towards Smith on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very Lifetime in that way where,
yeah.
You know, don't get me wrong, still decent considering, but
it wasn't
very
terrible.
much,
it wasn't terrible.
Very much skewed, right? And I think we're seeing that in both of these, that they lean a bit into one direction than the other, one perspective and then the other.
Yeah.
But you're omitting facts in the same respect.
Completely omitting them. Yeah, completely omitting them.
One thing that blows my mind in the movie versus what actually happened is that when you look at her bed in the movie, it is comically stained.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
it is like somebody poured the yellowest Gatorade they possibly could to make a stain that looked that way. And
like somebody took a trucker's jug and poured it all over that bed. Like,
ironically, her bed set was dry.
Yes,
for those who weren't aware.
Ironically speaking, like when you look at the actual pictures from the crime scene, if that were the case, they did the best bang up job cleaning up after every sort of mistake they made, because there's no way that bed was soaked like that.
It wasn't soaked. They found urine on her person, which is typical with a dead body.
I mean, not only dead body, but she was garroted to death. You're going to pee yourself a little bit, no matter how old you are.
Yeah, I think the bedwetting thing is, I can't wrap my head around that being why he got so fixated on this theory. I just don't understand it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I don't understand that they did some weird things and they handled some things improperly. Police can never accept that people want to protect themselves, which is ironic to me because, I mean, you're the police. You should know that people want to protect themselves. But whenever they do, they immediately just almost seemingly suspect guilt more than they're protecting themselves. Well, it's your daughter. Why wouldn't you hurry up and do this, this, and this? And I think people do that too. Why wouldn't you do this, that? Because if you pay attention to what happens in the real world, people get labeled murderers that aren't all the time. It happens very frequently, but it happens quite frequently, I would say. And it's hard to get out of that curtain of suspicion.
Yeah. It's hard to be able to push for the solving of your daughter's murder from jail.
Sure. Really is. I just can't get over having quote unquote JonBenét narrate the movie and just say weird things and it's just
very morbid and it's
so
not
weird.
It's not respecting the victims.
It is not. This movie does not respect the victim. I'll say that very clearly. Is there anything more you want to say on this whole situation? Have you guys just absorbed a ton of this case at this point? I know I have.
Feels like almost too much, really. I really want to go back to the days where I didn't know so much about this case again. It bothers me that there's so much information that you can dig up for what's going on with this case.
So I did not have the exposure to this case that it sounds like I really should have. So for me,
it happened when you were 2 or something, 2 or 3, whatever you said, 3. Yeah, I don't expect you to have a lot of exposure to it.
Right. So for me, it's I'm getting new things content to watch to understand what had happened. So I'm not opposed to having more of information come out. And I anticipate that if they are able to do the genealogy, ancestry related testing, then we'll probably get something more with updates.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. Now, can I ask you, because you weren't very familiar with the case, how did you see it when you start looking into it? Did you think, I get why they're looking at the parents right away? Or did you not even?
Yeah, I mean, you should always evaluate the family first. Statistically, it is usually someone that the person knows. But as you kind of go through it, the DNA, it's hard because it's hard to make it like a make or break thing, in my opinion.
Why so? Why do you think that?
Just, it's hard to be certain that the collection from the night that it happened or the day that she was found is enough and was handled properly to get a right match. You know, there's always the potential that they didn't handle it right.
It's fair. Okay, so as we close it out, my theory is intruder. Yes, the parents did showcase their daughter in pageants, and yes, many of those pictures make me really uncomfortable, as well as the rest of you, and I know you guys. They also resemble many pictures of young girls in pageants. It's a world where Patsy came from, so I guess I can understand it. Like many of you, I'll never truly understand it because I think it's gross. We haven't talked about that enough, but I don't want to get into a situation where it's like, well, don't wear that. Don't dress like that. You know, I don't think that's fair. Okay. Would I do it as a parent? Absolutely not. I would never put my child in that situation. Different things for different parents. Okay. But what my theory is that either A, someone saw JonBenét at one of those pageants and came to that home. Maybe they staked it out for a while. Maybe they planned for this. Maybe it was a little bit more spontaneous. Waited for them to sleep and planned to kidnap her in that suitcase. And it went wrong for whatever reasons. And they were there for personal reasons. I think I'm saying enough there. Or one, maybe two intruders actually planned a true kidnapping for the money, and then things went wrong when they were trying to get her out of the house. Perhaps the garrote was too tight, meant to control her, and it went south, and they did everything they could to make it look like a sex crime, and were too panicked to go back and retrieve the ransom note at that point. Now, I think option A is the most likely, but those are my two theories. What say you?
I'm going to second that one.
Yep, I'm intruder.
You are the intruder? Because that would be weird when you're 3 years old.
My theory.
Just clarifying. I don't want anybody right. We need to get a DNA sample from Amanda. It sounded like she was admitting to a crime right there. Well, I hope this family finally finds peace. I do feel like they were dragged through the coals through this whole thing. And especially knowing now that most parties find them innocent, especially the authorities that had, I would say, persecuted them to some degree in the court of public opinion. It's at least good that they can finally get some of their life back. Sad story. Okay, guys. Well, what would you have done differently for a movie take on this? Like, do you think we need another movie version of this, or is this one of those things where they need to wait until they actually have found some new evidence or a killer?
I would probably lean more on the inspired by aspects of it. If I had to make a movie, I would lean on more of the inspired on aspects of this. Use the story as a way to build a movie that has almost like a When a Stranger Calls feel to it, and develop something like that where you have a story that just unfolds way too dramatically and scary and turns out to be an effective horror flick, so in a way. But as far as like coming back to this well to tell this story, I'd rather wait until we had an actual perpetrator in mind.
Yeah, I'd rather wait for there to be a development and then get an update and understand how did we get to where we were, how did everything conclude, or leading up to hopefully some sort of a trial, a review of like information that's publicly known of any updates. Yeah,
I don't want to see another movie about this until it's done. I think this is a horrible case. Whenever it's a child killing, it's always harder. For me personally, I just have a hard time with those, and I don't, unless somebody's brought to justice, I don't want to know. I don't want to see another movie. I don't want people just milking this to make money, but I would, once hopefully they do catch someone, I would like to see how they caught them, brought to the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course police will come out and say, well, we always knew that. Oh, shut up. You didn't know anything. I love when people confess randomly or they get caught by DNA. Like, well, police, we finally persevered. I'm like, you did a blood test like that. You didn't do anything magical. You didn't Sherlock Holmes this shit.
You did a...
Sorry.
Okay. I'm not going to take away from the fact that some of these guys, when they get their blood tests, that they, all right, it is somebody in this family tree. Let's go knock on this family tree and see what shakes out. That's how much work they end up having to do with it. Like, that's a lot of work.
Some of it, but sometimes it's like when we put it in a database, we got a hit. Bam, we caught him. It took us 25 years, but we never gave up. Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. You just got a lucky hit one time. Come on.
Somebody gifted the right persons to 23andMe for Christmas on the white year, and you got your hit.
Yeah, you got a hit because somebody did some random over the web freaking blood test. That's why you got your hit. It's not because of stellar detective work. Get on this, man.
Of the cases that I've heard of that have been solved the same way, because it's not just the Golden State Killer.
Yeah, they got to dig in garbage cans and all that jive. I get it.
Yeah, they got to follow the family tree down. They got to, okay, so it's a third cousin of yours. Can you tell me about your family tree?
Good, but I'm just saying, whenever they do catch them, they act like they are. We just had to trust us. We were going to persevere, and we never gave up, and we worked on
like
this
they're
day.
Massive heroes for filing some paperwork.
And even though we got 6 suspects wrong, we got this one right. Okay, you destroyed the Ramsey family for the whole time, but outside of that, good job.
We're talking probably 6 different cops since have been handed this cold case. So the last one,
I get it. I'm glad you donate to their freaking yearly.
Hey, funds. You know what? Sometimes you got to look out for the little guy.
Yeah. It's just like a whole department basically elected to destroy this family's life, and just refused to move away from it. And then did public interviews and wrote books and shit. And I'm just like, that's not law enforcement to me. That's trying to forcibly you're trying to force your opinion to be fact. Tunnel vision. That's tunnel vision. Gets me frustrated. Sorry, it's time to go. If you enjoyed this podcast, share the show on your social media outlets. Give us a review in your favorite podcast app. You are, of course, our best source of promotion. So thank you for listening and telling your friends, especially your true crime friends, about our podcast. Thank you for listening to Inspired by a True Story. Now let's keep those artists honest. Sure hope no police listen in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Same.
Suddenly I got a turkey baster of some unsolved crime of blood like thrown in my yard.
What?